For the last couple of days, I've been spending my time playing an interesting little indie game called Yume Nikki. It's a very unique game, centered around surreal imagery and exploration, so naturally, I've been enjoying it very much. Among other games built in this top-down RPG style, where you walk around and do things, Yume Nikki really stands out because it doesn't function like a traditional RPG, or even a traditional video game in the strictest of definitions. To summarize, Yume Nikki is a game in which you play as a tiny Japanese girl named Maratsuki, cooped up in your room with nothing but a bed, a desk, and a fake NES. Likewise, the only thing you can really do is sleep and explore Maratsuki's expansive and bizarre dreams, the main attraction of Yume Nikki. In this dream world, you aren't given any sort of major guidance or structured path to follow. You're simply expected to wander about aimlessly looking for things called effects, which allow you to change Maratsuki's appearance in the dream world, possibly giving her abilities that make navigating the dream world easier. Obviously, Yume Nikki is a game built around the concept of dreams, but it's done so in a way that I think is very refreshing comparative to the way dreams have been traditionally portrayed in both video games and media abroad, which makes Yume Nikki such an interesting game despite its simplicity. When characters have dreams in books, video games, or movies, it's often simply a means to an end, serving as a plot device by which the character discovers something important about themselves, or as a method of foreshadowing future events in a cryptic manner. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, if done well, it can be a very effective storytelling tool. Dreams are inherently mysterious, so using them in conjunction with the mysterious elements of a story, such as a character's past or future events, makes a lot of sense. However, if you think about how dreams actually work, the concept of being able to predict the future or realize your past mistakes through dreams seems much less plausible. When people have dreams, most of the time they don't have any relevance to their lives in the real world. Psychologists still have a lot of unanswered questions regarding what dreams are and what purpose they serve in the human psyche, so we can't say for certain if they're related to the events we experience over the course of a day or not. This is one of the reasons dream interpretation is such a big deal to a lot of people. The human mind likes to rationalize things, so people who experience powerful dreams often feel as though there should be some sort of meaning behind them. People wouldn't have dreams if they didn't mean anything, right? The best answer to this question is not necessarily, since with our limited knowledge of how dreams are influenced by the human subconscious, and vice versa, we can't say for certain how relevant dreams are to our daily lives or our overall psychology. Granted, if dreams were always portrayed realistically in the media, it wouldn't be nearly as good of a storytelling device. If a character goes to sleep and has a random dream with no relevance to the story, and then wakes up and continues their activities unfazed, the dream sequence would be nothing more than a waste of time. However, when pieces of media center themselves around realistic dreaming and use it as their primary storytelling device, the results can be much more interesting compared to ordinary dream depictions, and this is certainly the case in Yume Nikki. Maratsuki's dream world is full of variety. Her dreams can be atmospheric, melancholic, eerie, frightening, uplifting, or just downright weird. And as you explore the dream world, you'll find that these moods can change in the blink of an eye whenever you enter a new area. On the surface, there doesn't seem to be any consistency or meaning to any of it. It's just random imagery. But if you accept the fact that her dreams have relevance to her life in the real world, and are willing to do a bit of speculating, you'll find Maratsuki to be a very compelling character. The game doesn't give you any information about what her life is like outside the confines of her room, and considering she outright refuses to leave, all you have left is her dream world. Judging from the contents of her dreams, it's safe to say that Maratsuki is a very troubled individual, but the extent of her mental trauma, how it developed, and how it impacts her behavior in the real world is ultimately left for you to interpret, which is exactly the thing that makes Maratsuki such a good character. She's a blank slate upon which you can create any sort of tragic backstory to explain the contents of her dream world. Her dreams can either be pointless, random imagery, or bizarre contortions of tragic experiences she's been through, and however much meaning her dreams have is entirely up to you. To say Yume Nikki is a game with no story is sort of inaccurate, since depending on the interpretations of the player, the game has the potential to contain a very powerful and compelling story about the abuses wreaked upon this tiny Japanese girl. This is something I call environmental storytelling, one of my favorite forms of storytelling, especially in video games. Most games rely upon the interactions between their characters to convey their story, and while this is a perfectly sound method of storytelling, it doesn't do you much good if you have almost no other characters in your game aside from the protagonist, and the characters you do have aren't very talkative. In games like these, environmental storytelling usually comes into play, where the game's story is told through the design of its environments and in the ways the protagonist interacts with them. It's a much more passive form of storytelling, and relies much more on the interpretations of the player. I'd say I prefer environmental storytelling mainly due to the freedom it offers players when it comes to telling a game's story. They can discover it at their own pace, and are allowed to make presumptions that aren't necessarily right or wrong. The result is a much more fluid interpretation of a game's story that encourages speculation and debate in its respective community. You can see this in the Dark Souls franchise very clearly, as its community frequently quarrels about the exact nature of the world the game series is set in, since it's presented in such a cryptic way. This is where the genius of Yume Nikki as a game really shines, since it merges the surreal, subjective nature of dreams with a form of storytelling that relies heavily on interpretation, creating a game with a story almost completely constructed by the player. The only meaning Madatsuki's dreams have is the meaning you give them, so any story you derive from that is entirely your own interpretation. Yume Nikki is 100% free, so if you have some spare time, I'd recommend downloading it and experiencing the game for yourself. It's moderately long and will continue to keep your attention with surreal imagery for a good portion of the game. Those were my thoughts on Yume Nikki. Thanks for watching.